And we're live.
Senate Appropriations, February 12th. We're here with Commissioner Gresham to talk about the BA as passed by the House and the governor's recommend. Specifically, we had Section 54, which was this kind of waterfall before the waterfall kind of thing. Okay. That we wanted you to explain this section for us.
So, Adam Gresham, Commissioner of Finance and Management, thank you for the...
On page 14 of this document, the language document.
So, this committee is aware that from time to time, particularly in the past, really 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of additional money that's come in over the course of the year from the time the emergency board forecast is made to the time the budget is debated and passed and signed and through the end of the year. So time to time we've been left with large amounts of money that was not anticipated, and over the years there's been different constructs to invest that money. Last year there was a contingency, there were contingency appropriations. You guys may remember, I think there were 18 or 19 of them. And so this year what we thought was that, you know, as we developed the budget, there was a, shall we say, a anticipated need from our friends in the education fund and in the education community. And so we thought that that need might be large enough, not so much in fiscal 26, although there too, but in future years and out years, that it may be smart to allocate some money to kind of avoid the famous cliff that the chair of finance often talks about, whereby you put additional resources into the air fund 1 year, and then the next year you start out in the hole. So this would be one way of providing additional resources either for this coming year or out years. So we put that construct into language that would reserve amounts that are, you know, unencumbered and unallocated for use in education and other, I forget exactly the wording we use, but we named 2 or 3 areas: education, housing, you know, governor's priorities, and we think priorities shared by the body. So that is how we provided essentially our contingency appropriation language. It was meant to acknowledge that there may be extra funding at the end of the year that we're not aware of. And certainly if January is any measure, it looks like that there will be. There was a fairly hefty amount of extra revenue over forecast, 30 million or so. You know, that's just 1 month, not a trend make, but so that was the idea, that we would set it aside and have the capability of using it for various things.
And is it needed in the BA, like timing wise, like we did it in the big bill? Would that not work because of the fiscal year, or could you also do this in the big bill?
It could also be done in the big bill. I think we put it in the BAA just to alert the body that this is something that the governor is very interested in. So we put it in the BAA, but it would work as well in the big bill. I would assume, as long as, you know, before the money is invested.
Okay. Senator,
I have a couple questions, but I'll reserve the other. But the language is, if I'm in the right section, shall instead be reserved for permanent housing, property tax relief, and any other uses determined to be in the best interests of the public in the subsequent fiscal year. So that last part just seems to be anything, that because we would, I don't think any decision that the governor makes, the executive branch or the legislative branch or the judicial branch, would they say are not in the best interests of the public. So who is determining whether it's in the best interest? And that language just seems to unreserve it, kind of.
No, well, yes, you're correct.
Yeah.
But I think the intent there was, we wanted to single out housing and property tax, education, the two obvious ones. But I guess you'd say we didn't want to get caught short if something else should crop up. So we mentioned the first two, and to your comment about what's in the best interest, well, that's for you guys and the governor to decide when you guys pass a bill and he signs it.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
But that's why we did it.
Yeah.
Just so we didn't get caught. Oh, gosh, I wish we put that in there. But we wanted to state outright the first two priorities.
And then my other question is it correct that this language replaces a current distribution of overage?
That's the notwithstanding.
Yes, we notwithstand what is 32 VSA 308, I think, C.
And that's
which,
the 50, 25, 25?
right, where half goes to balance reserve, a quarter goes to state employees' pension, and a quarter goes to a teacher's post-retirement adjustment allowance.
Right. So that's, I guess, where my concern comes in is, and I understand the treasurer is drafting a letter to this extent, but my understanding is that that distribution was part of the pension deal. And my worry is that we would be beginning a process of sort of prying up a piece of the pension deal if we take that mini waterfall away that's moving into the pension. Thoughts on that?
Every year, new priorities. And we thought that housing and education were important enough that they would kind of stand out. It is true that half of that goes to the balance reserve, which is almost at its 5% maximum anyway.
And that's what I was wondering.
I think I'm going to say 95 million, 5% maximum would be about 100, whatever the stabilization reserve is, so call it 105 million. And then another 25% would indeed go to the state employees' pension. The final 25% would not, in fact, go to the teacher's pension. It goes into a special account that is a post-retirement benefits account, which is separate really from the pension. It's pooled with the pension, but it's walled off. It is not going into the teacher's pension.
Well, what I'm wondering is, because we're talking about 50%, if we left the 25 as is, and since the reserves are nearly topped off anyway, could the remaining 50% be used for this piece? Does that make sense?
It's an idea.
And I guess temperature check on that idea.
As it turns out, so we are meeting our actuarially determined employer contribution. We will meet that, or else you'll have me to hang. And then we're putting an additional $15 million this year into pensions, which, when money is not tight, is a great idea. When money is tight, that's going to be a real pull. So I guess what I'd say is we are adding additional, at a minimum, $15 million to pensions. That was one of the considerations we thought about. We thought about putting more money, adding more money. But I would add to that it's not putting good money after bad, and we all are in the same boat with pensions. It's going to cost us over time. The more we put in there, the better. So I don't want to come across as saying, that's a silly thing to do, but I did want to remind the committee that we're already putting another $15 million into pensions.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking that, as you say, it's not putting good money after bad because it's buying down our thing over time. Whereas the reserves, if they're nearly full and we overtop them, I wouldn't say it's good money after bad, but it's not necessarily necessary
Right.
at the moment. So anyway, I just throw that out as a way to square that circle if there wasn't pushback.
For me, it's a little different because of the way it's worded and that we're doing in the BA, because we've done something similar in the budget where we take money for this year for things in the next fiscal year. So that's kind of how we've done it in the past. So it catches people's attention when you understand that, but if you could also just appropriate priorities, and we would know more in the big bill, like kind of what those are and the dollar numbers to say like, okay, we specifically have this need next fiscal year, so we're gonna put money towards that. So that would be another way to approach it. But at least I think, understand it better. Does anybody else have any other questions on this? So you're willing to answer questions on other sections, Christian? So section 52, these fund transfers, I think I've written a note, but then in here somebody reminded me, but since you're here, I'd ask you, this is on page 7 of this document. There's the state liability self-insurance fund.
Yeah.
Moving this 3 million, I mean. Remember, right, you said this had something to do with the EB5 settlement? Can you just remind me again?
Yeah, and on this one, frankly, I think we owe the House some gratitude. This was our bad when we submitted the BAA. It was not something that we knew about at the time.
This is a change that the House put in.
Right. So you folks will remember those dastardly people up there in the northern part of Vermont at Jay Peak. There was a large financial impropriety, ultimately settled in federal court. And there was a two-part, potentially a three-part settlement. The first part, I believe, was $9.5 million, which you might remember from last year's budget, the state put in. There was a second payment, and this is what we were just not aware of. It was made in July, actually, it may have been even July 1st. That was part of that settlement. That was the $3 million that you see here. And the reason that we were alarmed when we found that out was because normally the state liability fund receives money we allocate it out. It's an internal service fund. In fact, finance manager, I just paid our state liability bill. We paid, I think, $6,300, and larger departments will pay more. The trouble there is that this is a federal fine. And when we allocate out in internal service funds, many departments have federally funded employees. So we pay with federal money. The general rule of thumb is about between 40 and 50% of revenue is general fund. 50 to 60% is non-federal. It could be either T fund or, pardon me, is non-general fund. It could be T fund, it could be federal funds, it could be special funds. So we are very worried that we would be paying a federal fine with federal money. That's just not good. Federal government might be a little bit aggravated at that. So that's why you'll remember the $9.5 million, that was straight general fund. And once we saw that this payment was made in fiscal 25, the first day or so, we thought we need to pay that, make sure we move money into the fund that we can point to and say, this is the money. So that was our bad not to put it in the BAA, and the House, I think we went to the House afterwards and said, we kind of screwed this up.
Okay. That makes sense.
But that's why that's in there.
Okay.
And we'd actually put it in the C section of the big bill, and the House actually moved it to the BAA. We're fine either way, but
for this fiscal year, so they said might as well put it in here. The next section, 53, the $3 million for the Vermont House and Finance Agency. That the House, I get the House did, so maybe I should ask them. But you know what that?
So that is the funding for the $3 million payment.
Oh, it's the same.
That was an appropriation that was made and ultimately was not fully utilized. And so the Housing Finance Agency notified us and said that this $3 million is available for reversion. But that's how we funded.
What was the program? Do you remember, or was it a specific program?
I want to say it was a weatherization program, but I may have that wrong.
I remember they did give.
I can go back actually and look at the original appropriation.
Yeah.
I think it was a weatherization.
I think they're coming in, maybe we might have asked VHFA,
Oh.
so we were gonna ask them about it as well, but we have other questions for them too, yeah. Okay, so that's, you reverted that money to put the 3 million.
That's right. It came out to be a wash.
Okay. And then I have one other section. I think in the 70s. Section 72.
This is like a quiz here.
Yeah.
What if I can't answer you when you ask?
Page 40?
Section 72, yeah,
No,
page
page
39, 40, acceptance of grant. This was language being struck. And I think somebody tried to explain it to me, but now
Oh, is this the balance reserve?
It's grants, the E board.
I just have finance and management, but this is
It's
just,
a page 41, yeah.
page 40 and 41.
Yeah.
So it looks like,
Yeah.
you remember what that is?
So, and I think I have Amy to thank for cluing me in on this. This was language you put in there basically to kind of tune up the use of the balance reserve as a reserve. The way the language currently reads, you can use, if you need to respond to an unanticipated event, an emergency, so on, you can use a balance reserve, but you can only use up to 50% of last year's appropriation into the balance reserve or transfer into the balance reserve. So it becomes somewhat bizarre, particularly in years when you didn't contribute at all to the balance reserve. So, we thought, in other words, the language reads in B1, it reads, the General Assembly may specifically appropriate the use of up to 50% of the amounts added in the prior fiscal year from the general fund balance reserve. So if the amounts added in the prior fiscal year were, $1.50, you can appropriate 75 cents. It just didn't seem like it was a reasonable amount. So what we basically tuned up that language to say that you could use up to 5% of the balance. And by the way, you can't increase an appropriation above and beyond what it was when the General Assembly drew up the budget. But if a department, say, got a $1 million appropriation and had to use $50,000 of that to respond to an emergency, you can replace that $50,000 up to $1 million.
You wanted to say 5% of the fund's balance, not
Yes,
50% of the last year.
that's right.
And then the stuff about the emergency board.
And I think it allows the emergency board to use the balance reserve to respond to emergencies. I think that's why that's in there.
Okay, but then House struck this all out.
Yes, I think actually, I don't really have an explanation for why. They may have just wanted to give it more, more visibility. This could also be a big bill item. This was a finance and management show.
Not the chair of the committee say they just didn't have enough time to look at it. So, and they were gonna look at it in the context of next year's budget.
And we're happy to sit, we can have a back and forth with the joint fiscal office and the treasurer's office, and, either way. We just think that as it reads, it's kind of clunky. If this is really supposed to be a reserve.
Especially an emergency.
Especially an emergency where you have, some substantial payments coming out. So anyway, it would be for your consideration.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's all the items I have, unless anybody else in the committee has questions for the commissioner. Anything else you want to say?
You guys are the best.
Yeah, likewise.
We're counting on you to
Yeah.
straighten this thing out.
Okay, well,
Thank you, Mr.
we'll
Chair.
move on. Thank you, your time. And I think I saw DCF out in the hallway. Yeah.
Looks like.
Oh, you brought the whole.
I know.
We have some tough questions for us today.
Spread it around. No. Nolan, will you turn on the light? What? No, nobody was, no, who's guarding the office? They're all.
Makes it hard to ask for positions.
See, we're in the building anyway, half of us this morning up in, Human Services, and making an appearance. We're great, make sure we can answer any questions you might have.
Yes, well, had you in specifically about the GA program and, money that the House had put in. We wanted to talk about the math and also just get your position on it and any comments that you want to have on what the House did.
Sure, thanks, appreciate the opportunity. For the record, my name is Chris Winters, I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families, and thanks for having us in to talk a little bit about this. As I think you all are very aware, the Budget Adjustment Act proposal from the House includes an additional about $1.8 million to extend the hotel motel program. You know, what is the cold winter months that were in the bill last year for 4 months from December 1 through March 31st. Extends that until July 1st through June 30th of this year. And just to give you some of the math behind that so you understand the cost of that 1.8 million, that was a figure that we gave to the legislature based on what we saw as the usage of the hotel motel program, which would have been from April 1st to June 30th at around 1,100 rooms. So there's that 1,100 room cap that's in current law from the bill that was passed last year. So assuming it was going to be about 1,100 rooms, it was going to cost about $8.4 million. And so if we were to extend the folks who are in that program now and use our full capacity of hotel rooms, instead of 1,100 rooms, using about 1,425 over those additional 3 months, that whole cost would be about $10.2 million. So that's where you get the difference of 1.8 for that additional somewhere between 300 and 400 hotel rooms from April 1st through June 30th. Our position is that we stay with the bill as passed last year with current conditions, with the current 80-day limits in a calendar year, with the current 1,100 hotel room limit in the non-cold weather months, and that we have some consistency in the program that we have not had for more than a single year through this whole GA program's existence over the last several years. When you do waive those caps, when you do keep people in the hotel motel program, you're opening up the program, you're widening eligibility, and it actually creates an inequity for the folks who chose how to use their 80 days in the past calendar year. There are a number of folks who did use all 80 days last fall, and you all very much heard about that, I'm sure, in mid-September or so when those 80 days from July 1st were running out. And a lot of people were scrambling for housing in different housing situations. And we did see an increase of folks on the streets But what you will see again is if we keep the 1,425 rooms that we have now full for the next 3 months, it's really not fair to those who kind of decided to hold back on some of those 80 days and would be eligible for those 300 rooms that are going to open up on on April 1st. It also means that when you make the eligibility wider, we're turning additional people away. We've tracked over the last 4 months, there are about 700 households that have been eligible for the hotel motel program, and we have not had a hotel room to put them in, and we've not had a shelter bed to put them in. We will also offer a shelter bed first if we have a shelter bed available. So by extending the adverse weather conditions through July 1st, that just means additional people who might have had their turn, had an opportunity to use some of their 80 days, will be competing for hotel rooms that are already full. And so I think it means we turn more people away. And then depending on what happens with the GA program on July 1st, with this iteration, if it's still the 80 days, you've got 1,425 hotel rooms, and that 80 days will run out in September. So you get a larger cliff once again. So our position would be that we maintain the existing hotel motel program as was passed by the law, have some consistency over the next year, continue to focus on expanding our traditional shelter system. We can extend some of the family shelters that we have currently in place. We think we ought to take a wholly different approach to emergency cold weather shelter to focus on life safety. So when those extreme temperatures happen, that we do a better job of opening group shelters, typically congregate shelters, through an emergency management system. And that we look at things like medical respite and medically vulnerable shelters. We have 5 communities that are interested in that right now. So there are a number of things that are in the pipeline. We've expanded the shelter system by over 100 beds in the last year. We have another 100 beds in the works. And so with all of those pieces, we believe that sticking with the current law is the right approach here. And that these changes are not something that was contemplated last year, and that we have enough, I think, systems in place to catch as many people as possible who might not have shelter come April 1st.
Sorry to have you go back. Can you go back to the math again at the
Sure.
beginning? I didn't write all that down. You didn't submit anything in writing.
I'm sorry, I didn't, and I can do that for you. So what we have currently in place contemplates an 80-day room cap.
Right.
Over a calendar year.
Right.
So there would be some turnover in the system and people exiting the halls after their 80 days are used. It also contemplates an 1,100 room cap on April 1st. And so it doesn't contemplate using the entire 1,425 rooms approximately that we have available to us over that 3-month period of April 1st to July 1st. Right. So the math between, say we would use 1,100 rooms under the current law because people are coming in behind the people who are exiting on April 1st, and getting a chance to use their 80 days. So we think it will be, our estimate is that it'll be pretty much 1,100 rooms through those 3 months. So the difference between the 1,100 rooms and the 1,425 rooms for those 3 months is 1.8 million.
So it's that 325 rooms times
$80 a night.
$80 a night. Yeah. Times the 1,100 rooms.
It would be for the record, my name is Amy, Financial Director, DCF. I would say that, so the way that we budgeted it was 1,100 rooms for 80 days after OC ends. And then it drops because theoretically there were people who wanted to access the rooms. There'd be fewer that would need it at that moment in time. They might be saving it, they might not be eligible until July. So the end of June actually dropped to 800 rooms. until July comes back around for the 12-month clock. So that's why if you did the math, it might not work out exactly to the 1.8. I can share the numbers with you. If it's
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, that'd be fine to figure it out right now, but that, wanted to just make sure I understood how that's figured out. Senator Watson, did you have a question?
Well, I just have thoughts on what you were saying. I mean, I guess I would just say respectfully disagree. But, thinking about the points you were making about, consistency for the program, I guess my priorities with consistency for the people, I particularly think about the kids that are involved in the shelters and to be unhoused during the school year. It's very disruptive, and the upheaval that causes for people in their lives in general. And totally appreciating that some people, effectively budgeted their 80 days, but to have less disruption for people, I think is a value that I would prioritize. And again, I agree that it's not like a perfect system, but as a backstop, I think it's important to keep it in place.
And Senator, I would just very briefly respond in saying we have a limited resource, as you know, and a large number of people trying to access it. It's the very difficult question is, do you provide that limited resource for fewer persons for a longer time or more people for a shorter time?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Senator Watson, did you have a question?
There's really in this, for me, two pieces. There's the short-term piece, and then there's the long-term piece. And the long-term solution has been for a very long time, and the direction we've been headed is shelters. And in what you have just said, I get no sense of the overall, where are we in getting enough shelter space so we don't rely on a program that was really meant in its original existence to only be emergency? And where are we with the shelter space, and how many beds do we need in shelter space so we work our way into a better, more long-term solution to this?
It's a great question. We have, some over 3,000 people who you would say are experiencing homelessness. We have those 1,400 hotel rooms. We have about 600 shelter beds now, 620, which is up about 100 beds over the last year. We have a number of projects, and I say this is the royal we different community service providers, different municipalities have a number of projects in flight, and they get stalled out for a number of reasons: zoning, construction, community pushback, workforce is a big one. So the pace of bringing them on, you can see we've I think been fortunate to have 100 beds come on in the last year. That's maybe the pace that we're going to be able to do this, unless we do something differently, like contract for congregate shelter. So I don't think we can build our way out of this with shelters. So the shelters are a much more palatable solution because people are wrapped with services at many shelters. They have professionals running those shelters. There's better safety and sanitation, generally speaking, at the shelters than there are in the hotel rooms. But we're never going to build 3,000 shelter beds. Well, I should say, if we've got 1,400 hotel rooms and 600 shelter beds, another 1,000 shelter beds in the coming year. But we think the solution is, to try to focus on those shelter beds as much as we can, is to have additional affordable housing units. And it's to prioritize the people that we can help in the hotel motel program. It's focusing on those who are most at risk, who are most vulnerable, and making sure that they truly are that we're putting the highest risk people into the hotel rooms.
When you say congregate shelter, what do you mean? How many beds? What am I looking at?
So you look at the communities that,
And what would I do to move that along quicker?
so the challenge with that has always been workforce and the people to run it. We've tried to do that with local service providers. They're stretched thin, they don't have the workforce to do it. We've done it with contractors, which is expensive and I think inefficient. But what you can do is you can, take an existing state building, a gymnasium, a warehouse, an office building that's not in use, and you can bring in cots and you can bring in staff to do it. But that's always on a very short-term basis. That's not a long-term solution. It's not a solution that works for families. It's not something that's good for a number of people who should not be in a congregate setting. But that is a short-term emergency solution that to stand up would be expensive, but it's something that we're willing to do for April 1st. It's something.
And how many beds could you create for April 1st?
I think the last time we did it, I'm trying to remember, 4 shelters, and there was probably a capacity for up to 50 people in each one.
And how many of those would there be? But what am I looking at in total?
So we focused on the 5 communities where we see the most need: Bennington and Brattleboro, Rutland, Central Vermont, and Burlington. We did 4 shelters instead of 5 the last time around, but I think that's what we would look at. But what we did see that those shelters, and it was done on very short notice, but those shelters were not used very much at all except for in the Burlington area when we did that last year.
Senator Bruce?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the update on the shelter beds. That is more than we had last year, and I think that's all to the good. It's still obviously far short of what would be necessary to get out of the hotel program. But I was struck by the argument that there's an inequity issue if we put the 1.8 in, because we would be breaking faith somehow with people who husbanded their rooms. And it reminds me of the argument people sometimes use about forgiving student loans, that somehow it's inequitable for people who paid their loans back. And for me, the equity issue is you have people without homes and then you have people with homes. And the equal benefits clause in Vermont guarantees that people will be treated the same under the law. And I feel like the law that we've been passing for the last 4 or 5 years is deficient. And I include myself as a lawmaker in providing that equity for those people. So when I look at this 1.8 million to extend the program, on balance, it seems much cheaper than the family shelters that we were standing up quickly and trying to run, which were serving very few people but spending a great deal of money. And I can't in my own mind make an argument that somehow we're serving the principle of equity by not extending the program through the end of the cold weather to the summer. So I just want to speak to the $64,000 question, which is it your sense that the governor would veto the budget adjustment over providing more rooms for people without homes?
I don't have a sense for that, and I wouldn't presume to speak for the governor on this. I think he did make a comment about it at the press conference today, that he would not be using the V word at the press conference, and want to look at the whole package of the BAA. But I definitely defer to the governor on that one. I think to your question of the inequity, I did make it sound like, there is a fairness issue here and an inequity, but it's also just the practical math of having that limited resource. And if you lock it up with fewer people over those months, when you have a line of 700 people who've applied and not been able to get in, that they have less of a chance of accessing that limited resource.
Then my other question was about, and this goes back to a discussion we've had several times about the 1,100 room cap being set in law, rigid, no discretion, and as a result, people who are disabled and sometimes severely disabled being unsheltered in that way. If we were to add language that made that 1,100 room cap subject to your discretion as commissioner, specifically built around making exceptions for people with those kind of major disabilities, is that something that you could support?
I appreciate you asking the question again, Senator. I know, yeah, I've been in this chair a couple times before. You've asked the same question. I will tell you that I am going to go before ALCAR tomorrow morning where they're asking me to remove any prioritization that's in the proposed rule that we have. And those exceptions you talk about, if it was written into law, I can imagine the number that would cross my desk and the difficult decision-making that would have to happen. I think if for every person that gets into GA, there's another person who cannot. So with that limited number of beds and number of resources that we have, you're picking winners and losers, and I don't want to be in the position to do that. What we have done is I'm working with the Department of Aging and Independent Living on a process for identifying people with intellectual and developmental disability that we can determine if they're eligible for Dale resources, determine if there are other housing options available to them. In most communities, we have a local interagency team with healthcare and other community resources together that triage these cases. We have field services people who identify those special cases, and we do everything that we can to find a different solution for them if they're not able to get a hotel room. So while I truly do appreciate the question and as much as at times I would like to have that discretion and an exemption authority, I don't think any of us at DCF want to be in that position of making those choices when it can be very well defined in law and vulnerable categories.
And I hear what you're saying, but I mean, in essence, you're arguing to shelter fewer people, and you're arguing to have less power to avoid unsheltering people with disabilities. And it seems to me that the basis of your mission as a department is the reverse. So I'm just wondering why DCF never comes in with a plan to shelter everybody or to protect the disabled or whatever. The discussion is always somehow on its head, where we're arguing for that and you're explaining to us why it can't happen. So I appreciate the position you're in, but I will just say that as someone who has been on this side of the table for the last 4 years, we've tried various ways to try to get around this problem. And when this happened the last time with the 1,100 room cap, and I heard you and others in the administration put that on the legislature, our hands are tied. The legislator capped these rooms at 1,100. We have no discretion. There's nothing we can do. You essentially left that moral responsibility with us, which I'm rejecting here and now. And I'm going to try to find a way to give you more power as the commissioner to make things better for these people. If that means removing the 1,100 room cap, maybe that's the only way we can do it, even though that will still leave a delta of hundreds of people. But I don't like the box in which what we agreed upon last year has left us. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Senator. And I would just say that that's a conversation that's happening in House Human Services this week and next. And we're all open to talking about a better way to administer the General Assistance Program and our shelter system in the next iteration of the GA program for FY26.
And I hope that is in fact true. Seems to me $1.8 million is a very inexpensive bridge until that point.
To Senator Lyons, and I think it's a good segue that what I'm hoping, since we're not the Health and Welfare Committee, that the Health and Welfare Committee would take some of this up and give us a recommendation. But do you have anything to say before we move on?
Well, I will say that what I'm hearing from Senator Ruth is the moral obligation that I think the agency or department has is pretty clear. It's not just been 4 years, it's been 5 or 6 years that we've been talking about the issue of people who don't have a permanent place to live. And in Elkhart alone, we've been going through emergency rules. I don't know how long, it's been a long time. And tomorrow is just the next iteration of that. And we've seen some things added into the rules that don't reflect legislative intent that was in Act 113. And we've talked about that in Elkhart. I don't have to repeat that, but the eligibility requirements, among others, and then pulling people out of housing to move others in. That's another issue, I think, that is implicit in the discussion that we're having. It just seems that $1.8 million is, I think as Senator Booth has pointed out accurately, a really important bridge without getting into the details of opening up a whole new discussion on a new bill. The House Human Services is working on GA. Certainly they'll look at adverse weather program as well. And I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about extending that program a short period of time because we have such a significant problem, not unique to Vermont by any means, but people needing a place to live. And when it's families or people with disabilities or people with chronic illnesses, it's tragic that they aren't cared for. So I will leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for the commissioner? Thank you for coming, providing some of the math, but if you could also send me the numbers, that would be helpful. And then with those numbers, if you could also let me know how much money you have left over, like 10 million that you have for shelters. I know you're supposed to spend some of that, but I assume there's money.
We can do that.
Here.
Sure.
Okay. With that, thank you for your time and testimony, and
Thank you.
we'll be in touch. And maybe Senator Lyons will figure it all out for us.
Okay. We'll have to find some time in our schedule. I hope the commissioner's available.
The whole team. We're going to move on to the exciting topic. State House X-ray machine. Scott, if you want to join us. Oh, we does. Do you want to join us?
Yes.
Okay, so we invited you in to talk about something we saw in the budget adjustment around the X-ray machine.
Yes.
Which we got into a detailed discussion about it, and we were told, well, you already bought it, so I don't know. So, but with approval.
With approval.
With approval,
And
yeah.
I'm happy to
So if you
explain.
just go through that $100,000 and what was spent and not spent, and if what's in the VA is just cleaning up something that already happened, or if there is something that
Yes,
you need or not, that would be great.
happy to. I'm the Executive Sergeant at Arms, and I'm joined by Scott Moore.
Joint fiscal office.
And to speak to the money, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn over to Scott, because
Okay.
he really is the money guy on it. Thank you, Scott.
Good afternoon, committee. So the X-ray machine that we have that you see in the vestibule by the loading dock cost about $47,000. A little bit less than $47,000 in total. And the idea is there was $100,000 appropriated last year for cafeteria chairs and tables and furnishings.
For the Sergeant at Arms office, I think.
Yes.
For the sergeant, and that was in the capital bill. That $100,000 in total, currently we have spent $52,000 and change on cafeteria chairs and furnishings. So therefore, all told, out of the $100,000, we spent about $99,000, not quite, just a little bit more than $99,000 in total.
Can you verify the cost of the chairs? Because I've heard rumors.
$32,000 for 115 chairs, give or take. So,
$330-ish per chair. And we hope the last chairs lasted 50 years, so I'm hoping these ones last a similar amount of time.
So they're like, when you sit in the chair, you don't feel like you're sitting in a $350 chair, but maybe that's just like, it's like they're meant to be more like commercial use, or maybe that's just me, I don't know.
Yes.
I haven't bought a chair recently, so I don't know what they cost.
Chairs are surprisingly and extraordinarily expensive. The average office chair that maybe like Amy's sitting in, for example, would be $500.
Yeah.
The chairs you're sitting in might maybe more like $1,500.
Okay.
So they're exceptionally expensive.
Okay. And then, so the 100,000 was just for chairs, but you didn't need all 100,000, or you still need to buy more chairs?
Yes, I'd like to buy 16 more chairs. We bought enough chairs in consultation with the company that consulted us, the consultants. I think we could fit probably 16 more chairs in the cafeteria. Right now we're using folding chairs, 16 folding chairs. So that would be maybe an extra $7,000 that I would need from that $100,000 appropriation. But where we saved money was the $100,000 appropriation was for tables and chairs. Chairs because we lost a significant number of them in the flood.
Right.
And tables because they are very old. They were always meant to be temporary tables.
The one in the cafeteria?
The ones, yes, and they were 50 years old and it was time to refresh them. But what we decided to make some savings, and this was even before the x-ray machine came into the picture, was the tables that have the white top with a wood trim were actually in good shape. So we saved those and refinished them. And what we replaced were the square top wooden ones that were in rough shape. So we purchased far fewer tables than we originally intended, or originally thought that we needed to replace, and that's where the savings was.
Okay. But before we move on that, can I ask you another table
Yeah.
question? The tables that were in room 11, what's the replacement plan for that?
I'm glad you asked that question because we don't really have a plan yet. Right now it's folding tables. The tables that were in those rooms were lost in the flood.
And they were like nice wooden
They were
tables.
nice
Beautiful.
wooden boat-shaped tables.
Yeah.
There's miniature versions of them still floating around the
And
building.
Is that
And
a
the chair.
pun?
And the chairs.
Floating around?
Tartar.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
The old chairs were very nice and
They're very nice, and we lost a significant number of the black chairs that used to be the audience chairs in room 11.
Right, yeah.
So, so we don't have enough of the black chairs to seat 100 people in room 11 anymore. So now you'll notice there's gold chairs in there, banquet style chairs. So we will, my plan is to work with the chiefs to come up with a plan for furniture for rooms 10 and 11, but it will likely mean coming to this committee and asking for money because it will probably be very expensive.
And there's no like recovery of that money through FEMA that's what they were lost in the flood.
We do have a FEMA claim, and I don't want to misstate anything on the record by speaking numbers, but I will say that whatever we get through FEMA will not cover what we would need to replace rooms 10 and 11. And I'll also say that the furniture we had in rooms 10 and 11, those boat-shaped tables, probably weren't ideal anyway for that space. They had no modesty panel. They were easy to move around, and so people would move them around all the time. So we would probably recommend something different than what was in there, something a little more suitable for a boardroom style setup.
Are you expecting an ask for an appropriation for next fiscal year for 10 and 11?
It would probably be that David and I come up with a plan this summer and then work with the JFO to build it into either my budget or the legislative budget. I'm not sure which one.
So for 27.
Is that right? Yeah.
Okay.
After 26, we already had put together.
Okay, so you had the savings from the cafeteria and an opportunity to buy an x-ray machine came before you and you're like, hey, we have money. Is that basically right?
It's kind of that simple, yes. Yes.
And then you went to JLMC.
Exactly, to see if we could shift the funds, I know shift's not the right word, but reallocate the funds from cafeteria furnishings to the x-ray machine.
And was the x-ray machine something you were planning and just kind of moved it ahead?
We were planning on it. We were gonna delay purchasing it until we could appropriate the funds. The thing about, so Chief and I both started in March of last year, and we had, a lot of ideas very fast. And so we missed our opportunity to ask for money for the upcoming fiscal year, because it came in March. So we were just gonna wait another year to ask for the X-ray machine. But this was a good opportunity to do it.
Okay, Senator.
And just a piece from JLMC, we did have a discussion about this, and, you know, it's a security piece. And so we prioritized that above other things. This is part of planning for single entrance use in certain conditions, and then maybe at some point moving to everyone coming into the building through one entrance, and having an X-ray machine as well as space in the back rooms to unpack bags and look into bags. That was all part of that advanced security thinking.
So with the X-ray machine hasn't been used yet. Like last time for the governor's address.
Right.
So the hand check. So are we planning the next time we have an event like that to use the X-ray machine, or that's still way off till we do renovate that whole space?
So the use of the X-ray machine, even before I came on board, there were times when screening bags was deemed necessary. So what the X-ray machine does is give us a quicker, arguably quicker, but certainly less intrusive way of doing that. We don't have to open anything bag. So to answer your question, we haven't used it yet this year. The budget address and the inaugural, let me back up. We'll use the metal detector, the X-ray machine, when there's a reason to. So if there's a known or perceived threat, there were no known or perceived threats at the inaugural or the budget address, so it was just normal operations, which is, of course, enhanced security because the state police are here and they're screening at every door. But there was no reason to change our security posture that day. If, for example, there was a threat to the building, a known threat or a perceived threat, we would activate single point of entry. You would get a text on BP alert. We'd activate single point of entry. We'd pull out the X-ray machine. Members of the public would be directed to the loading dock door. Legislative members could still go through any door that's badge access. So the closest one would be the Lincoln door, and you do not have to go through screening. And again, because at that point we would know what the threat is, what the known or perceived threat is, and historically it's not members. If a member was the threat, then we might ask members to go through the screening process, but that is not our plan, to have members go through the screening process. No, the X-ray machine has not been used yet this year.
No plans to use it on regular course until the future.
No, and Chief Holway's here to answer some of the security questions, but my understanding is there's no advantage to having random days where you pull it out and there's really no advantage to that. So we want to really just use it when our goal is to always have our security posture match what the threat level is.
Okay, great. Any questions remaining about this item in the BAA? We're just kind of cleaning up the appropriation. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay. Senate Appropriation Alumni Day.
Yes.
Definitely there.
2 days in a row.
Yeah.
Was it yesterday, James?
Oh, yeah, Jay came in yesterday.
2 days in a row.
Heard that.
Yeah. So, yeah, please join us up, yeah. Move through this. Yeah, so I'm glad we caught that all on camera when Jay came in.
Yeah. We have to add a soundtrack.
Yeah. Okay, so we're back to we're still on the BA, different parts of the BA. I have to remember what we were gonna be talking about.
I can give you a hint.
Yeah,
Caseload reserve? No.
In section 50, items 4 and 5, I think are the main topic. So on page 2.
Page 2,
That's page one, isn't it?
page
Well,
1
section
of 49
50 is,
and
but-
50 together?
But.
Oh,
4 and
no,
5,
I see. Struck 49, okay.
Oh, yeah, and also 82, we were gonna ask you about.
82 is related to sub 4.
Okay, so we were gonna first do, what did you say, 50? What
So
section?
so section 50, item number 4 in, I don't know what the subsection is, I didn't print out the big report, but it's the $10 million stabilization fund.
Oh, right,
That, we spoke about it when we were in for budget adjustment a little bit. And it was it's in H141 as it comes to you from the House. And the appropriation in subsection 4 in section 50 of general fund, for provider stabilization to DEVA, that's pretty straightforward. The operative piece around this is what the House added in section 82.
right.
Which refers back to the appropriation, in sub 4.
That's what we
51,
wanted,
page 51.
that's what we wanted your opinion on.
So this language in section 82 is, language that the agency administration, and the House, members agreed on as an acceptable and workable, language for the stabilization fund. Just a reminder that it is a finite pot of money. It's the intent is we'll have an application process. We'll have technical assistance from some contracted, basically accounting, finance assistance for vetting the requests. But it's a challenging amount of money to put out because we want to make sure that we are actually stabilizing a provider, and, not sort of postponing the inevitable.
Prolonging the
And so, we don't know how many, we have a sense of some of the people that are in the wings that when this is enacted will be first, out the door to fill out an application. And then we'll have to have the process of going through that, but we don't envision this in any sort of like prorated way. It's, as they come in and as we
The first
go
come,
through.
first
So
served.
first come, first evaluated, but if anyone will be able to apply, given the size of the pot and the need out there, not everyone's going to result in an award.
Right.
The center line's first and the center first.
Well, no, you've explained it, I think. Sometimes when you see a pot of money like this, a squeaky wheel is there right away. So ensuring that it's going to the places that need it most financially.
Yeah, and there's a
Yeah.
time dimension to this as well, given the size of
Yeah.
what will be in there. You may find that there's folks that come a little bit later that you want, that are a better fit. So it's a challenge. I'm just being very straightforward that will be very challenging to administer, even though everyone views it as very, very necessary.
I also view it as very necessary. I'm just looking at the language, and it strikes me that the whole paragraph is about who is eligible to apply, but not about how the money shall be dispersed, or what criterion would be used, so it's speaking to who can apply, but not who will get money and under what.
So that's true.
Priority list.
Right, so it's not usually how we do it, I don't think. So we're just trusting 100% that the eligibility will be, once the pool is there, that there will be a rational set of reasons why one.
That's the central office is engaged, and I'm part of that, seeking technical assistance from basically a forensic accounting firm, so that we have both the assistance to vet the financial, reporting that we will be asking for as part of the application process, and the sustainability plan that whatever entity it is has. And that process is going to be primarily the basis for the decisions. I can't think of anything else that would have that basis.
Well, I'm just thinking what you just said is language that isn't in here, that there will need to be a sustainability plan and there will be a forensic accounting firm.
So we don't have the entire application process set up yet, but being clear about that, you know, this information, you know, as part of your application, we have you know, helping us develop what is the financial reporting we need to understand the particular need at the applicant, and then also what we need to understand about the sustainability plan. It is, there was a previous version of this in the central office, and you essentially last year in the budget process sort of swept out the remainder of that money. And so that process ended. We're sort of jumping forward from that process, but with a bit more rigor with this technical assistance.
Yeah, okay. I find that reassuring what you said. I was just speaking to the fact that we have $10 million going out and we're saying who's eligible to apply, but we're not saying what criterion would be.
Because it's a very diverse universe of applicants in terms of, and that it is a challenge of how there will be, you know, everyone who thinks they might qualify will be able to apply. We're pretty sure that the amount of money that's here is not going to be sufficient, even if we find that they are in dire straits. But we're going to have to potentially make some decisions among the providers, and they're different. There's social service providers and healthcare providers, you know, all types of healthcare providers. And, you know, just to be frank, you know, when this was proposed, it was before the events of 2 weeks ago on the federal funding, which may be changing the universe of applicants as we expanding the universe of applicants potentially.
Sarah Lyons had a question.
Yeah, so no, as you're talking, and I did hear what you said, and it sounds like a plan, financial sustainability plan. But we know that there are a lot of, there are payers in trouble, there are providers in trouble, and the healthcare system overall, as we look at it in our committee, there's going to be some recommendations to be made. I guess the concern I have is that we open this door and then everyone is looking for some financial support for short-term sustainability. We did some of it in the past, at least with one of our hospitals. It's, you know, there's precedent for it, but we don't want it to build because some of the money we might be able to do to fix the system. Right now, we're plugging a hole in the dam, and something's going to spring out over here. Maybe we sort of want to fix the whole system. So I'm just saying that's a concern, and so we need to do more to put a healthcare plan in place and to build some resilience in terms of cost containment overall. That's not your job. Diva can't do it, but obviously.
We're one segment of the system.
But no, thank you.
Okay.
You alluded to a piece that we have had a history, and we did help Springfield, and we've had some success at that. And the agency has had a fair amount of success in saving nursing homes, and a fairly long list of that to get there. So that the agency in the overall is gone into this. I would say, I would hope that whatever sustainable plan comes in, we don't give any money to anybody we know is gonna fail. And we set something up with parameters that say to the organizations, you're gonna find a way to work together better to get to place. Because I know a lot of these organizations have had mission creep during COVID. And so I think that around it. One of the things we did with the nursing homes, though, is at the end of the process, we get a list here of the people that we've helped, that we've got them to on the other side. I would hope at some point after this is all over, not during the time it's going on, but after, we get some sort of a report about what's worked and done right, because I'm afraid that this may not be the last time that we're asked for help. And that information about what worked and how it worked might help us think about this better in the future.
It's a very reasonable request.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions or comments on this? I had another question on section 6, the blue.
Did you want to talk about sub 5?
Step 5 was the Brattleboro retreat.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
I think we're clear, and then maybe you can just remind us quickly what that is.
We are in it's called an alternative payment model method with the retreat, where we buy a certain amount of beds at a certain rate under a contract for a calendar year. And if we go over that utilization of those beds, we have a corridor of how many we get for free and then how many we pay for. And this is a very similar number to the reconciliation we have for the calendar 23 year. And we know how many beds were used in 24, so we know we will owe this amount of money. We have to run through, into the spring and reconciling is Medicaid the final payer, because we have, folks in the retreat that have other insurance, that has to be exhausted, and those claims have to run through in that reconciliation process. But unless something is very different from previous years, this is a very, it's a high confidence level of estimate of what we were going to have under the agreement that we had in place for 24. We have
$11 million.
Yeah, and we are entered into, we're in a 25, we haven't sort of signed off completely on the 25 agreement, but in that agreement, we are buying more beds at a lower rate. So hopefully it will be a lesser amount in the reconciliation process next year.
It's good that they've had additional beds for us to use.
It's beneficial to the system in terms of not having, the backups in the emergency rooms, et cetera.
Senator Watson?
If this is a long question, I'm happy to hold off and ask this of Amy later, but I'm just wondering, why is it called alternative payment? Why is it an alternative payment?
It's just that it's the nature of the way the agreement is structured, where we have a baseline of beds, a rate that we have agreed to year, and then we have sort of an over-under. If we underutilize, they wouldn't have to pay us back until they hit a mark, and then they'd have to pay us back when we overutilize. And 23 was the first year we overutilized, and 24 we continued to overutilize at a very similar rate. And then, so for 24, we actually have 2 tiers. The first tier is this much, these many beds are free. We use this much more. Then another tier of beds free, but we're still ending up in this targeted $11 million for 24.
Thank you.
So that's the alternative nature of the agreement.
Okay, Senator Norris?
So what I think I just heard was, let's just say, for instance, you have 100 beds. They guarantee 100 beds at a price of whatever, you can come up with $11 million, whatever else. Do you just pay for those beds whether they're being used or not, or is that
No, this is, so
underutilized
the
that you're
retreat,
referring to?
so for example, the retreat has 100 beds.
Right.
And we say we're going to use under the 24, on average, 51 beds a day of those 100 beds. And it's a total amount of beds for the year in the baseline. We're gonna pay for that many beds at this rate, it equals X. If we use less beds than that, they would, I think the corridor was 2% in 24. If we use 2% less beds than that, they get to keep the money. They wouldn't have to pay us back. If we use 10% less, they'd have to give us 8% of that money back that we pay them. We're in the opposite side of that equation. We're using basically 20% more beds than we agreed to when we went into the agreement for 24. And so that's what you're seeing here is that even with the corridors of how many beds they give us, essentially, we don't have to pay for. The first 2% that we use over the baseline, we don't pay for. And then there's another 10%, and then another 3% we don't pay for, and we're still in this category. So 24 is a very high utilization year of retreat beds. So it is high utilization with those sort of over-under small corridors on either side. And that the point of it was to give both stability in terms of the cash flow to the retreat, but also to reconcile this based on utilization. And they are seeing their costs coming down as the point of the 25 agreement that we are having a slightly lower rate. I think they've been successful at needing to use less travelers and have more permanent staff.
Great. Okay, anything else on that? If not, since you're here, do you have anything to say about the section 66? There's a subsection 2 about the blueprint for health pilot being extended a year.
Yeah, so this is the one-time money from 2 years ago that was a 2-year pilot. You may want to talk to Brady and JFO. There's probably a technical adjustment coming to this because this really should be, the money will carry forward until expended as opposed to 3 years. We don't want to give anyone the impression that there's a full 3rd year of available funding within this appropriation.
Okay.
So that, I don't know what the status is of that, but that's as a heads up as you form your bill. I did talk to Brady this morning just to know, so he's aware of it.
To both.
To anywhere where the 3-year,
Okay.
which is what the amendment came over from finance and management as, but there's a similar amendment to a health department piece where it says it'll be carried forward until expended. That's what should be here instead of 3 years.
Does that make sense? Okay, so you would like that for us to make that change to the House group?
That's a technical change that we would recommend, and I believe AHS would recommend. I just don't know where you're at in the process from technical changes in the formal process from.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to get ahead of that.
Yeah. No, that's great to know. Now is a good time to make that change. Okay, I think that's it, all that I had. Or unless there's anything else you want to tell us.
Budget adjustment? No. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you miss us?
I do miss you sometimes. There's some days I don't.
Well, we
He was looking
understand that.
He was looking specifically at you when he said sometimes. Well, thank you, Stephanie.
Sure.
If the committee would allow us just to have a quick discussion on the pilot funds with Ted and Syria, and then we can take a break. We haven't had a break in a while, and then come back for committee discussion, which is see if we can close out some of the sections, just talk about how we're gonna finish the bill. So Ted, if you don't mind joining us. This is in relation to the flood recovery fund that we heard from VLCT at the beginning of this afternoon about finding some relief for these small towns that had this kind of major flood damage. What I'm proposing is that the money that we use to fund that come from the pilot fund. So JFO is going to talk to us about the pilot funds and the money that we would use to make these grants to the municipalities.
Great, I'm just hopping into the Zoom right now for the record. Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office.
We can list the data.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so yes, I will be talking about the pilot special fund and the general pilot program at a very, very broad level. Pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes, and it's designed to compensate municipalities for the value of state property that would otherwise be exempt from property taxes. And there are two pilot programs. One is the general pilot program, or the building pilot program, which compensates municipalities for the assessed value of state-owned buildings. And there's the A&R pilot program, which compensates towns for the value of land that is purchased for conservation. This presentation will be primarily about the first pilot program, the building or general pilot program. The A&R pilot program is a whole separate conversation and methodology of compensating towns. The current general pilot program was created by Act 60 in 1997 and has been roughly in the form that it was when it was created up into the present day. So the pilot special fund receives 30% of local option tax revenue minus a $5.98 return fee that's administered by the Department of Taxes for processing payments, allocating revenues to towns of the pilot fund. Local option taxes are 1% on sales, rooms, meals, and alcohol taxes levied by a municipality. It can be any permutation and combination of those three tax types or all the above. In 2024,
can you just do alcohol but not meals, or if you do meals, you have to do alcohol? They're always together.
In statute, it is sales, rooms, meals, and alcohol. Okay. In 2024, 28 municipalities had a lot on some version of meals and rooms taxes, rooms, meals, and alcohol. And 22 had a local option tax on sales. And some of the sales, folks who have local options on sales are included in the 28 who also have it on meals and rooms taxes. Recently, the miscellaneous tax bill last year, Act 144, allows all towns to implement a local option tax without a charter change. Previously, that right was reserved for the gold towns, towns that met certain property tax criteria. That was outlined and later amended a bit in Act 60 of 1997. And that will be important later. We'll revisit that and what the ramifications that might have on pilot revenue. There are three buckets of pilot payments. There's the main general pilot program. It's involved in a calculation that I'll get to in the next slide. This also includes there's a statutory cap of $750,000 on University of Vermont properties. The vast majority of payments are happening through this piece. It's in section B142, the annual appropriations bill. There's a piece for correctional payments, and this includes two pieces. One, $152,000 that is kind of layered into section B338. There are payments for Newport and Springfield, and then $40,000 for the remaining correctional facilities. And then there's the Montpelier pilot payment of $184,000. In section B143, the $40,000 and Montpelier pilot payment, those amounts were present in the original conception of the pilot program.
From 97. Mm-hmm. So they haven't changed.
In fiscal year 2024, the pilot appropriation was $11.25 million. This is the first time we've been fully funded. Previously, there's not enough revenue to fully fund payments, so they're prorated. So, yes, moving on to the calculation. The calculation is outlined in statute, and it really relies on three pieces. The total assessed value, the common level of appraisal, and the adjusted municipal tax rate. The key piece about the total assessed value, different than how one normally thinks of property taxes, this is using the insurance replacement value of buildings. With a slight asterisk that for correctional facilities, this includes the value of land. But broadly speaking, state-owned buildings are reimbursed for their insurance replacement value. These values are provided by the Agency of Administration to PDR. So that piece is multiplied by the common level of appraisal, CLA. This is backwards from how you might think about it in the ed fund context, where local values are being adjusted to match statewide values. This is taking statewide valuations and multiplying them, so bringing them generally down, not always the case, but bringing them down to locally assessed values. And then this value that's been modified by the common level of appraisal is added to the town's base grand list. And then there's a calculation for the adjusted municipal tax rate. And so this is the total sum of money that's voted by the municipality for non-education expenses divided by the municipal grand list. So the math relies on those three pieces and you arrive at your final pilot payment.
Senator Watson?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about this. So one is, if it's not too much to ask, I'm wondering a little bit about the history of this as being the formula. Because I know a lot of states have different, so it's really two parts. So I'm wondering about the history of how we got to here, because, you know, the one possibility, right, is that it would just be the property value and not multiplied by the CLA. And then I'm also wondering, how does Vermont compare with its pilot formula compared to other states?
So as far as I understand, a little bit before, this calculation and this section of statute was around the original pilot conception of the program. I can't speak to certain, you know, I understand the intuition for the CLA adjustment is to kind of adjust between local and statewide values. There are certainly different ways to do it. I'd have to look into how other states may vary their calculation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So unsurprisingly, pilot payments tend to concentrate in certain municipalities in the state. Montpelier, for very obvious reasons, Burlington, because they host UVM properties, and then towns that host Vermont State University locations. So you can see Castleton down here is slightly brighter in color. Linden, also slightly brighter in color. So yeah, this map shows the darker you go in blues, the higher amount of pilot payments, and then the lighter you go in greens is a lower amount of pilot payments, and these are all based on fiscal year 24. Another key piece about this map and how the information is presented, different, so in Randolph, for example, there's two pilot payments, one that goes to the town and one that goes to their fire district. Both of those amounts are included for Randolph's just because I wasn't able to layer those different districts on the map. It's for information clarity here. But yes, there's also a table showing the top 10 towns and how they're receiving pilot payments and how much. Outside of where pilot payments are concentrated, I would say the remaining of them are relatively small. There's 161 total payments to all the different jurisdictions. 118 of them were less than $25,000. So this could include park buildings, AOT garages. There's a whole host of different properties that would receive or incur pilot payments.
Okay.
So talking a little bit about how we got to the fiscal picture within the pilot special fund. Between fiscal year 17 and 21, revenues and expenses were pretty closely matched to each other. In 17 and 18, revenue is a little higher than expenses. In 20 and 21, expenses are a little higher. But starting in fiscal year 22, revenues really started to outpace expenses. As you can see in the chart here, this allowed proration of pilot payments. It essentially ended proration of pilot payments. So in fiscal year 2017, the proration was about 75%, but by 2024, we were able to get to that full payment. And this is primarily driven by that excess revenue. And so by the end of 2024, the pilot special fund had a balance, so total money that's in the fund at the end of the fiscal year of 10.3 million, and revenue above expenses there was $3 million, approximately 3.2 of revenue that was above expenses in fiscal year 24. And if trends in sales and use and meals and rooms taxes, and we maintain a similar level of towns that have a local option tax, which we would, we can expect a similar amount of revenue over expenses going forward.
So what was it in 24? The difference, the delta?
Yes, it was almost not quite 3.3 million. It's 3.29 million.
Okay.
So, and do we know why?
I'm going to go to the next slide. Yes. So as far as I can tell, looking at the data, there are two trends that are driving that increase in revenue. One is both sales and use in meals and rooms taxes post-pandemic were quite strong. On the sales tax side, we saw a lot of consumer spending. This is a national trend of spending on goods, furniture. People are in their house looking at their couch and annoyed that their couch was what it was, and so they maybe bought a new couch. And so, yes, the broader economy switched more towards goods directly after the pandemic, which positively impacted the sales tax. And then on the meals and room side, after a really sharp dip during the close pieces of the pandemic, meals and rooms, particularly in Vermont, rebounded pretty strongly. So that also helps increase revenues. The other piece is we're starting to see more and more towns implement local option taxes. So this table here shows that in 2017, we had 17 towns with some sort of local option tax on a permutation of meals and rooms, and 14 on the sales tax. And by 2024, it was 28 towns and 20 with the meals and rooms tax, and 22 who had a sales tax local option.
So in this, when I look at this, if I say sales and use tax and I say rooms and meals, it could be the blip, we're up, and if we went in a recession, we might dip down. So that if there's more towns, that might mean that it's more sustainable over time. How would we balance off to make sure that, I can certainly see some balance in there where we want to be on the positive in case revenues dipped and stuff. But how do we find the sweet spot between building up too much and you got my question.
Yeah, exactly. And right, so broadly speaking, depending on the type of town that's implementing a local option tax, an additional town or two implementing a local option tax likely has a bigger impact than the trends in sales and use in meals and rooms, unless there's a really strong downturn. And I think the piece that I mentioned about the miscellaneous tax bill removing the requirement to go through a charter change might make a local option tax more accessible for more jurisdictions.
Well, I would just correct you in that. For somebody that's had a long history here, when we have a downturn, revenues go fast. So I'm a little about all of that. But, clearly we're building up money in a way that we might want to think about what we're doing.
Yes, and I would certainly note that yes, in a recession, changes could happen quickly. And I know previously with pilot appropriations, there's a lot of conservatism in ensuring that when estimating the amount of revenues that would derive to the pilot special fund, there's been conservatism in determining the appropriation level. And so that's certainly a piece here, is that one could tailor the appropriation to monitor what available expenses are.
Okay. Anyone, you have another slide?
That is it on my end.
I had a slide that just said question.
That's right.
And then, do you want to say there's a memo that JFO put out? Is that basically the same information that you just presented here?
This is the condensed version of a issue brief that we worked on over the summer. If the committee wanted more context on an example pilot calculation, I went through that piece pretty quickly. That is an appendix in the issue brief, but yes, this is a summarized version of what's in there.
Okay. And it's on JFO's website, I assume.
Yes, and I can also provide it to Elle and post it on the page.
All right, any questions? Yes.
I assume that we can expect just an increasing number of municipalities to adopt local option taxes over the coming years, right? I mean, the trend is upwards, and we made it easier last year. So, I mean, do you have any inkling as to how many more we can expect in the short term?
I know there are a few that have a local option tax on their town meeting day ballots. And Hartford is one, Montpelier is one. Yeah, so there's a few. And so, yes, looking into town meeting ballots are a good way to understand.
They already have it, but we have it on rooms and meals and they add, they don't add sales.
Already have those.
So I have a question in reference to that. So Montpelier's on the pilot project, he's using them as a top. So if they adopt a 1% where a lot of these revenues come from, how does that affect their payment to Montpelier now?
So they are already at their 100%. And so the additional 30% that goes to the pilot special fund from the local option tax revenues would presumably, without any policy changes, go to the bottom line of the fund.
Before, when we were not giving them the full value, adding more might help them because the pilot fund would have more money they can put. But now that we're basically over collecting on or at least on 1 year, as Weston pointed out, we could have a downturn, we could have an extended downturn where we would want to have some kind of reserve or something, I would think, which is, I don't know if JFO has talked about that or if you talk about that in the memo at all about pilot reserve. Since we've never had enough money to pay it, reserve has not come.
But they still get their 70%.
Town gets their 70%, yeah. And it's minus the $5 fee that tax collects per business that returns it, per business per year.
Per return, yeah, when they submit a return monthly or quarterly, depending on their, yeah.
Yeah, Senator Brown?
Yep, earlier, one of the first slides, there was a cap on the University of Vermont or something. When they buy additional land or build additional buildings, does that cap stay in place? Does it move with inflate with the value of the new property, or how does that work?
So the $750,000 cap is a $750,000 cap, regardless of the property that's purchased or within.
They just pay 750. They don't even do the calculation on the value.
They do the calculation on the value. It's just the values they do the pilot calculation and then prorate it to get it down to the $750,000. Because if you took off the statutory cap, I would provide the exact figure. I think it's $8 million in pilot value for UVM properties, so it has to be, the decision was to prorate that value.
Okay, yes, sir.
Sorry, I guess I do have a question. So, something I'm not quite understanding. So, does the state of Vermont pay the pilot on UVM's behalf to the city of Burlington?
So, the payments are to pretty much the city of Burlington, so I'll speak to that one. The pilot revenue from the fund goes directly from the city, to the city of Burlington.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
it's for, because the University of Vermont wouldn't pay taxes.
Yes.
And so we're effectively paying their pilot payment
We're
for,
counting those buildings as state
as
buildings.
state buildings. And we do the same, I assume, for, the other, like Vermont State Colleges. Okay.
exactly.
And that 184 for Montpelier, that's not the total, that, because then this is just was an additional amount that was passed 1 year, if I remember correctly, or in the first year. So we do the calculation on the total value, and then we say plus 184.
Yes, recently there was, a provision to make sure Montpelier didn't go over 100% of their, pilot payment. And so the way it works out is they have their the full value, and then the 184,000 brings them up to 100%, but it's, yeah. It gets a little more garbled now that payments are at 100%.
So that 184 wouldn't be paid?
It is.
Or that was paid to kind of get them to 100%, so this year would be a different amount?
It's, sorry, for clarity, the 184, you have the full Montpelier payment, that's calculated. The 184 is essentially paid to Montpelier, but it's subtracted from that full payment. So the part that comes from the general pilot payment plus 184 equals their 100%.
Because 184 came from the general fund?
Yes.
Okay. So we could just stop doing that. We only did it because we did it because we wanted to. But.
What, the 184?
Yeah.
The 184 predated the pilot project.
Yeah.
There was a payment to Montpelier. And when they put the pilot program in place, Montpelier got pilot plus the old payment.
But only up to 100% of the pilot calculate value of this.
So, but going back to Senator Brennan's question about UVM has expanded its ownership of buildings in Burlington. They purchased the Trinity campus, for example. And then does this also include the University of Vermont Medical Center? And because there's the Lerner College of Medicine, that's segregated, trying to sort out everything that's there. And then when the medical center expands, because there is some UVM ownership and it goes into other communities, what happens with that, if anything at all?
I will look to confirm what's in the UVM.
I'm not trying to cause a problem of time, but I'm just curious how that all sorts out.
Yes, I will look at through the pilot program, there's a state building inventory, and I will look and see what the magnitude of UVM parcels are, because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I would want to do that. I also want to check, it's possible that the 184 for the Montpelier's allocation comes from the pilot special fund, so I just want to confirm how it is in the budget. There's a specific call out, whether it's general fund or called out to be from the pilot special fund.
I do believe in the governor's FY 2026 recommended budget, that pilot payment is no longer in the budget because they are fully funded. They're at 100% now. So that additional payment is not correct.
Because it's all local. So I've got Johnson, whose pilot payment went down this year because of the CLA piece. Are they an anomaly, or did other communities go down?
I doubt that they are an anomaly, just because of the nature of the CLA and how it's changing in many towns around the state. If the committee were interested, I could provide information about how this changes in CLA impacted town payments, but yes, Jonathan, exactly.
I will be over and ask you.
Okay.
Before town meeting, I'll have to go and speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of tough, especially in a town like Johnson in the top 10, that it's a big part of your budget that goes down.
Big part of the budget, but I would only say in making sure that the payments remain consistent, that if we went to a downturn and it dropped payments without some sort of a reserve. Johnson is wild this year about their payment dropping. So if you drop a payment when the economy's not good, yeah, they need some balance in there.
Yeah,
Sorry, I do have one more question. So, you talked about pilot having two parts, and you talked mostly about the first part, but I am curious about the second part, where we're paying, for property that was purchased for conservation. And I'm wondering, who, purchased by whom?
So this is through, A&R, Agency of Natural Resources. When they acquire a piece of property, they, yes,
Yes, so it's state-owned land.
state-owned land, yes.
So but it's going to, okay, I think that's,
One thing to just clarify that, like, that includes state parks, state forests,
Yeah, but that doesn't come
fish and
out of,
wildlife. No, that comes out of the general fund.
that comes out of the
That comes
general
out of the
fund, and we pay nothing for those lands.
And, the fish and wildlife, I should know
Sorry.
this, they used to work there, access areas.
thank you.
Yeah, ski area contract.
So listen,
Do our, did you have another thing?
no.
I was gonna say if our friends from the league, if they hung around all day to hear do you have any?
We have a lot to say about this.
I'm sure you do.
Come back, we could go back later today or.
Yeah, well, and I assume this is gonna be an issue for government ops to talk about in more detail on what they wanna do with it, so. That's where you'll get your opportunity to give the full vote of hay, the center situation. Okay, with that, I'll let you go. So we were gonna walk through some of these things, but I don't know how the committee feels about doing that now that it's almost
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
Yeah. The center line, we're gonna talk after this, so I'm just gonna say we can adjourn for the day. We'll